The school-to-prison pipeline is the description of how the school system is set up to push you into the prison system.
School's no longer a community. School's no longer a family, a place where we're always welcome.
You walk into school, the first thing you see is a metal detector. The first face that greets you is a school police officer.
All the kids want to do is go to school. They don't want to go to school to be labeled a criminal.
When folks talk about the school-to-prison pipeline, it's real. There's a direct correlation to lack of education, economic opportunity, and also incidences of incarcerations.
We have had kids in the system, hitting somebody with a ruler. We've had kids in the system tussling or fighting in a hallway.
They put me in a cell, took me and handcuffed me to the chair.
I sat in a cell for 11 and a half hours.
I was having an emotional breakdown because I knew in my heart that I didn't really do anything.
I just felt like I was being criminalized.
These are my kids, and this system has taken them and turned them into something they're not.
I think zero tolerance actually makes schools more dangerous. It creates the illusion of safety, but not the reality.
The concept of zero tolerance makes no sense anywhere for anything.
It's a recipe for disaster for a lot of young folks. We know that it doesn't work. It would be insane to continue this policy.
To feel alienated and to feel watched in your own school is not healthy for that student.
If you disrupt the positive things going on in his or her life, they may never get that back.
This criminalization is not just an inner city problem. It's happening in every school district, suburbs, inner city, all over the place.
What if we stopped and we looked at each one of these students as a human being and said, what can we do to help you become a better student?
The school-to-prison pipeline is made up of several different factors or components. There are 4 different components that make up the school-to-prison pipeline. The first and most talked about component are the zero-tolerance policies. These policies first came about after the 1999 Columbine shooting. This tragedy shocked the nation and served as a catalyst for increased concern about school safety. Zero-tolerance policies now severely punish behavior that is deemed unsafe toward the school. Depending on the school district, these policies can punish severe offenses such as weapons and harming other students to minor offenses such as pretending to play superheroes at recess. These zero-tolerance policies make no exceptions based on situational circumstances. The American Bar Association has been critical of these policies, calling them a one-size-fits-all solution that has redefined students as criminals. Suspensions and expulsions can be given for minor offenses. There are even news reports about a student being suspended for chewing a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. Students who are frequently suspended fall further and further behind in school and sometimes can never catch up. The second component of the school-to-prison pipeline is closely related to zero tolerance. The second part of the pipeline is excessive policing. In an effort to make schools safer, many districts are employing school resource officers or police officers. These officers are supposed to be there to keep the students safe, but more often than not are used in disciplining of students. Students who are in trouble can now be sent to the school resource officer instead of the principal. This blurs the line between school discipline and criminal action. Students can now face criminal charges for actions in school. Say a student shoves another student in the hallway over a guy. In the past, the student would be sent to the principal's office and maybe get a detention or a day out of school. Now that there's a police officer in school, the student could be facing assault charges. This policing of students leads to the next component of the pipeline, which is the institutional similarity of schools and prisons. After police came into schools, metal detectors and backpack checks began. Students are also subject to random drug tests and searches. Students are being treated like prisoners in their schools, which leads them feeling dehumanized. Schools are no longer a place of feeling safe and part of a family, but rather feeling watched like prisoners. The final component of the school-to-prison pipeline is high-stakes testing. Students in high school are subject to exit exams. Students cannot graduate high school unless they pass these tests. The problem is that not all students have the same resources, meaning not all students have the same opportunities to succeed on these tests. Schools located in low socioeconomic areas have fewer resources, including textbooks, quality teachers, and facilities. Research shows that students in low socioeconomic schools do worse on these high-stakes tests. If they cannot pass the test, they cannot graduate high school. Without a high school degree, it can be impossible for them to get a good job that would help them escape poverty. High school dropout rate can be tied to prison rate. According to PBS, incarceration rates were 63 times higher for high school dropouts 16 to 24 years old than college graduates.
The No Child Left Behind law took effect in 2002. It affects what a student is taught and the tests they take, the training of their teachers, and the way that money is spent on education. The No Child Left Behind Act holds schools accountable and empowers parents to encourage their children and is trying to help close the achievement gap in American schools. The only problem is the U.S. Department of Education has neither the personnel nor the budget to make sure all the nation's public schools comply with the No Child Left Behind's complicated regulations. Education officials have said from the start that the key to enforcement would be parents who pressure schools to give their children the options provided by the federal law. But not all parents know this, nor do all parents take action. Those who agree with the law argue that a one-size-fits-all approach to education overemphasizes testing and does not provide enough money to schools to achieve success. The No Child Left Behind requires stricter testing and stricter policies, which includes a zero-tolerance policy. A zero-tolerance policy in schools is a policy punishing any student disobeying a rule. In schools, common zero-tolerance policy is the possession or use of drugs or weapons. Students who obtain a banned item for any reason are always to be punished. Students who are forced out of school for disruptive behavior are usually sent back to the origin of their unhappiness, which is their home environment or their neighborhood, which are filled with negative influences. Those who are unnecessarily forced out of school become desensitized to their surroundings and fall behind in their studies. Many eventually drop out of school altogether, and many others commit crimes in their communities. The school-to-prison pipeline is in every school, but some are worse than others, particularly in the inner-city schools where a majority of the students are made up of African Americans. Approximately 12 to 13% of the American population is African American, but African Americans make up 40% of the 2.1 million male inmates in jail or prison. In these inner-city schools, the school district does not get the funding they need, and therefore the classroom becomes overcrowded and students begin to feel unhappy. They do not feel like the school is a top priority for them, especially if they do not get the education they need, and they turn to the streets for acceptance. When they go to the streets, they learn the ways of the streets, then bring that back to the classroom, and since almost all schools have a zero-tolerance policy, if they start a fight or bring drugs to a class, they will become suspended. When they become suspended, they feel even more unwelcome to the school and find more acceptance on the streets and become arrested because of illegal substances or fights, and they'll find their way into jail. This is the school-to-prison pipeline. We live in a democracy where all men and women are created equal. It's unfortunate to know that the school-to-prison pipeline is targeting a minority, when we need to be providing programs to parents to help them understand the importance of having their children succeed in school. The No Child Left Behind policy encourages this, but action is rarely taken because funding is just not there. Breaking the cycle will be tough and require money, but we know that placing the poor in one central location just compounds the problem. We need to truly integrate our economic classes. Without doing these things, we stand no chance, and the problem will never become fixed. It's issues like these that lead on to other education and public health disparities and disproportionately affect us. And of course, this leads to the bigger society burdens that shouldn't be burdens in the first place. This relates to democracy because in a democracy, men and women are created equal, but obviously not all schools are made equal, and therefore not all education is equal. So therefore, how can we all be equal? We are failing to educate the ones who need it the most, and this is limiting their opportunities in life. While it's easy to think that the school-to-prison pipeline only impacts particular students and their respective families, we must remember that our whole society will feel the consequences. Today's youth are tomorrow's leaders, and we must remember that we cannot teach a student who is not in school.
The school-to-prison pipeline has been notorious for sweeping up students from target demographics for nearly 30 years. Benning and Rose discuss the underlying causes as to why these groups, mainly African American males, but not disincluding other minority groups, are often disciplined with punishments such as suspensions and expulsions. Rose and Benning imply that students who don't fit into school norms are red flagged by teachers. A student that doesn't fit in with the school's norm unsettles a teacher, as staff and teachers are expected to always have control of their students. When a situation like this catalyzes in a classroom, a teacher can easily identify and target a student as a problem student. Additionally, male students are more likely to get in trouble than female students. The Indiana Education Policy Center funded a study on the sources of disproportionality in school punishment in 2000. The study concluded that the school districts that rely heavily on discipline systems that incorporate suspensions and expulsions are running the risk of being disproportionately heavy with minority students and male students, especially African Americans. Benning and Rose go on to explain the cause in the overrepresentation of African American males routinely being upgraded by the school systems across the nation. It is not a new phenomenon that minority students, especially African American males, have been paid too much disciplinary attention to. Because of this, 3 explanations as to why these groups are targeted are frequently thrown into the ring. The first of these is the socioeconomic difference between a white student and a black student, and not race itself, that causes the scales to tip in favor of white youth. The second is the myth that African American youth participate in more risk behaviors and need more severe discipline. The third explanation as to why these groups are pushed down the school-to-prison pipeline suggests that the method for collecting data on the disciplination of ethnic groups doesn't work. This last reason as to why minority groups are so grossly misrepresented is because there is no way to ensure variables in the study of these disciplinary discrepancies, and they can't be truly controlled. The trouble with these justifications is they are simply straw man arguments. They have been erected with the sole purpose of being knocked down over to distract from the real problem. If an African American family cannot break this vicious cycle, how can they ensure the generations that come after them will succeed enough to move out of their own socioeconomic status? If more African American students are suspended and expelled from school for behavior considered forgivable or acceptable from white students, does that free the student schedule and open the door to exposure to risk behaviors? And most importantly, if data cannot consistently and truthfully provide insight into this major social problem, how else can we measure the gap in misrepresentation in discipline rates between African American males and other groups? These important questions need to be answered as America is working to stop the targeting of social groups, instead of being reasons not to pursue the terrifying issue.
Finding pros for school-to-prison pipeline was extremely difficult. Everything that I found was against it and didn't support the school-to-prison pipeline. I personally don't agree with it because I think it does lead many students to jail with the zero tolerance acts in school. With zero tolerance, if you do anything that is dangerous or a teacher thinks that is going to be dangerous for the school, they will automatically suspend this student. They will make them go home, and this may be a place that is unsafe and has a lot of crime in the neighborhood. When this happens, more and more students are feeling unwelcomed in the school, and this leads to them dropping out and getting into trouble. In my research, it stated that African Americans are locked up 6 times more than the average white person. It also said that teachers target more African Americans because they think that they cause more trouble, and the teachers just use stereotypes to define them. But what I think really led schools to have this zero tolerance would be the case about TJ Lane. He was just a normal student that came into school on February 27th, 2012, and shot 3 students. It was said that it wasn't random, that actually one of the kids that he shot was his ex-girlfriend's recent boyfriend at the time, and the other students were their friends. I think this really became a shock to many schools that everything or anything weapon or drug related wasn't going to be tolerated. As I do too think this is a smart choice and should make students in the school safer, they only target certain students. Schools announced a new partnership called the Supportive School Discipline Initiative to address the school-to-prison pipeline and related discipline policies. An Attorney General Holder stated, "We need to ensure that our educational system is a doorway to opportunity and not a point of entry to our criminal justice system." The goal was to ensure fair discipline policies which are not obstacles to future growth and achievement. But how is it fair that we target certain race and just assume they are looking for trouble and aren't going to get anywhere in their life? This is why we, as future teachers, need to forget about race and treat each individual with the same respect. I also think that if we are going to keep these kids out of the street and keep them out of jail, that if they do something in school, we need to if we have to suspend the students, I think we should keep them in school suspension. This keeps them in the school and out of streets where they could be getting into trouble. This is really the only thing that I could find with pros, but as you can see, it's also a little of a con because a zero tolerance doesn't work in every school system.
The school-to-prison pipeline also dispels the myth of meritocracy. In meritocracy, one's own abilities and personal skills determine how far in society they climb. In this idea, if someone has enough knowledge and skill, they can achieve anything. However, this is simply not true in American schools. As Haley and Jen discuss, minorities are at a strong disadvantage in this country when it comes to schooling. These students may have extremely high merit, but cannot get ahead because things such as the school-to-prison pipeline are holding them back. Some minorities, such as African Americans, sometimes express their excitement about school in a way that teachers might seem disruptive. Teachers do not understand that and often target and punish these minorities. Because of harsh policies, minorities are being punished and expelled at a much higher rate than white students. Minorities in America, particularly black males, are locked up at a disproportional rate. The meritocracy myth presents what they call the intergenerational race to get ahead. It shows that merit can only get you so far because some people start the race far behind others. Things such as the school-to-prison pipeline continue to hold these people back from making more than a few jumps in this race. Jonathan Kozol shows another side of the school-to-prison pipeline in his book-turned-movie Savage Inequalities. He discusses how the prison industrial complex is a billion-dollar industry and how we are spending thousands of dollars incarcerating people that we could be spending on their education.
Budget percentage going to education has been falling. Where's the money going? It's going to build more and more prisons.
What are we going to do? How many more prisons can we build? Can we afford to keep building prisons? Prison construction is the #1 growth industry in New York State. Nationally, about 23,000 black men graduated from college 5 years ago, but 2.3 million black men and juveniles passed through the correctional system in the same year. The moral implications of this are devastating for our society, but the financial implications are if possible, even more extraordinary. I mean, what are we doing? Why spend $60,000 a year to keep a black guy in prison in New York and $6,000 to miseducate him when he's a child? Does that make sense to anybody?
If we gave them a good education and gave them facilities that they would want to come to and a chance to learn, the dropout rate would be lower, the juvenile crime rate would go down, and we'd actually end up saving money.
The ideas of democracy and democratic schooling we have discussed in class very strongly go against the school-to-prison pipeline. Ayers feels that as citizens, we need to take an active role in democracy, get involved, speak up, and take action. But when it comes to the school-to-prison pipeline, not enough people are taking action. There are organizations and groups out there fighting against the pipeline, but the average citizen and teacher is not getting involved. I think Ayers would feel that citizens need to stand up for the children in America who are being pushed down the school-to-prison pipeline. He feels that a democratic education teaches love, care, and concern for one another, and it is like a brotherhood. However, the policies that have created the school-to-prison pipeline do not reflect these ideas. They make school feel more like a prison than a group of people working together for the common good. In our class definitions of democratic education, it was agreed that in a democratic education, all parties involved need to be involved in policymaking. Zero tolerance policies do not take in the views and thoughts of students and often parents. Police presence in schools often takes control away from the teacher and administration. Once a student has broken a rule, it is no longer up to the teacher to decide fair punishment. A teacher may dismiss a student from the classroom for being disruptive, which could lead to him being escorted out of class by the school's police officer. The punishment would then be up to the school's resource officer instead of the teacher in charge of the student, oftentimes leading to punishment that really do not fit the crime. This is not at all how a democratic school would work. I think that Paulo Freire would also feel that school to prison does not fit into the framework of democratic schooling. He felt that schooling should be humanizing, problem-solving, and thought-provoking. However, the institution-like feel of schools actually makes students feel dehumanized. They are often treated more like prisoners than students with intelligent thoughts and ideas. Paulo Freire also felt that education in democracy should open doors and open minds as students forge their own paths. But as you have seen so far, the components of the school-to-prison pipeline actually shut and limit students' opportunity. I think Cornel West would feel that America needs to wake up and see that democracy is simply not taking place in our schools. West feels that Americans need to be truth seekers when it comes to democracy. I think West would feel that Americans are failing at this job when it comes to the school-to-prison pipeline. A lot of the information out there right now is simply a definition of the pipeline because many Americans have no idea it even exists. I think he would want citizens to take the truth to the media so that it could be exposed, and that from there reform could begin to happen. In Democracy Matters, West discusses how many people simply do not vote because they have realized in the past that their vote has not changed anything. They have become disillusioned to democracy. I think that the same thing can be applied to democratic education and school reform. People have gone through school, have seen the system fail for them, and don't believe it can be changed. They have seen their voice be shut down by administration and the government and feel that nothing they can do will make education democratic. In conclusion, the school-to-prison pipeline shows just how far away from the ideal of democracy and democratic schooling America still is.